Welcome friends! This is episode 14 of my Enigmatica 2 Expert Extended Playthrough series, and since almost the beginning of our life here in the new base in the valley, we were working toward the spectre coil, which is an early game source of an infinite energy. We have built most of the things you can see in our base to serve this purpose. At the end of the last episode, we got awfully close to finally crafting the spectre coil, and we worked on conglomerate of coal, specifically these central components, which is bituminous pit, required to get ourselves a regular pit, which we succeeded to do with a pit bog from forestry. So I really think today is the day. Soon all the small energy problems will be resolved, in this world anyway. But before we begin, I would like to tell you that I have updated my version of the pack from 1.9.0 to 1.17.0. And if you will check out the Enigmatica 2 Expert Extended Discord or the GitHub page of the pack creator Krutoy242, you will see that a lot has changed since the last time. One of the sad changes you can see behind me, our cow pen is empty, and this is because the mod Animania was removed from the pack. I like this mod very much, and all the birds and hamsters you can meet in the wild as you travel, but now that this mod is removed, we will have to find some other ways to make our base more lively, but I guess there are plenty of other animals out there in the wild. Besides other smaller changes, bug fixes and performance improvements, we got the changes to the questbook. In particular, we got a whole new chapter on computers, which includes computer craft and open computers, and I'm really excited to check it out and see how computers are implemented in this pack. And then another thing is that the Thermcraft chapter was significantly reworked, and I believe there are some new items and materials in this chapter, and I'm really interested in Thermcraft and specifically in its add-ons, which I never played with, so this chapter will help me to figure them out. But as of right now, nothing excites me more than knocking the spectre coil out of the park. So let's get started. And the first thing we'll work on is the bituminous pit, and it requires pit, which we just figured out with our pit farm, the ash, and we have almost infinite amount of ash from our kiln. So the third thing required here is one of the three kinds of propolis. The simplest kind of propolis can be squeezed out from the honey drop, and the honey drop can be centrifuged from almost any kind of bee combs, so it could be a good time to start forestry bees, and I love forestry bees, but I believe it's not the time to start them yet, because a simpler way in my opinion is to dry one bucket of honey inside a drying basin to get the honey drop. And some of you know where I'm going with this. Apiaries from rustic produce honeycombs with remarkable rates. We can put 20 of these apiaries right next to our smasher, and because in the last episode we switched to creosote oil, this actually freed smasher to do some other things, and in this case he is crushing honey. The whole system worked like this. The apiaries produce honeycombs which get sent into the basic drawer and from there into the crushing tub for smasher to crush into honey. Liquid honey is then sent to this fluid tank, and from there it is sent into this drying basins, and I have 19 of them here. They are drying the honey into the honey drops. Once the honey drops are produced, they are sent here into this basic drawer. This is only temporarily because then they are sent to the squeezer, and squeezer squeezes them into honey. And if we take a look, the propolis is squeezed out of the honey drop with only 5% chance. So we are wasting lots of honey that way. As you can see, I'm dumping that honey into the trash can. However, we still produce some of the propolis, and while setting this whole thing up, I already produced 18 of them. So slowly but surely we will be getting propolis from this setup. And again, the whole setup is still controlled from our controller, which I use to produce iron. The squeezer in this case is powered by the wind generator from Mechanism, and we got this particular one from the reward crate in the last episode. If we take a look inside, we'll see that the wind generator produces 88 RF per tick, and the production of wind generators is usually based on height. Our base is located in the extreme hills, and you can see in the top right corner that the Y coordinate is about 81, and that's the reason for slightly higher wind generator production. If we take a look at the progress board, the next thing we need to produce is biocoal, because for the conglomerate of coal coal, the next thing we need is blackout powder. And blackout powder has three components. The ash we have a lot of, flux we can obtain in large quantities if needed, but the biocoal we still need to produce. And in order to do this, we'll need to burn a biomass, and biomass is made from canola seeds, which are placed in a compost bin. The compost bin is really cheap. It needs a wooden pile and then 6 treated wooden planks, and so I use the XNet system again to pump the canola into the 5 compost bins, and once it gets transformed, it will send the biomass into this basic drawer over here. If you are in a rush, you can always use time in a bottle to speed up canola seed transformation. However, we don't have to rush at all, because I believe you can get a stack of biomass in about a minute. While we are here, I wanted to point something out. I was fully expecting for our wooden farm to eventually use up the humus below the trees and turn that into some sand, and then I would have to replace that sand with the dirt. However, as you can see, we still have a stack of sand, which I brought in the beginning to set this drawer up, and it was never used, and also the dirt was never used. So I believe I can safely remove these 2 drawers. Let's cook up 8 stacks of biomass. Crush 8 stacks of redstone into flux, and then grab some ash in order to craft the blackout powder. I have set up this analog crafter which will automatically craft the blackout powder if we put all of the components over here and flip the lever. As you can see, the crafting begins, and eventually this wooden storage crate will be filled with 8 stacks of blackout powder, which means that eventually we can craft 4 stacks of spectre coils with this blackout powder, which is totally enough to begin with. And the last component we need to get in order to craft conglomerate of coal is the tiny pile of heavy fuel dust. And this thing is kinda complicated. So the tiny pile of heavy fuel dust you can get from heavy fuel dust. This thing itself you can get if you crush heavy nugget, and heavy nuggets are made from heavy ingots. And now finally heavy ingots can be smelted from heavy mixed lump. And you can get these things if you get 2 pulverized lead, 2 crushed black quartz, and a propolis, and you get 6 of them. This large set of recipes seems like a nightmare to be automated, but this is only until you do the actual calculations and see that the single recipe for the heavy lump mix produces 864 tiny piles of heavy fuel dust. So we are not going to worry about it too much, and instead we are going to use our crushing setup which we developed 2 episodes ago and throw 64 heavy nuggets in it in order to make exactly 8 stacks of tiny piles of heavy fuel dust. While the crushing is happening, we can go back to our carbon brick setup we did in the last episode, and we'll see that we have about 9 stacks of carbon bricks actually. So let's just grab 4. And then pass them on to Ellie, our gem cutter, to produce little black squash balls. Of course, for the spectre coil eventually we will need spectre planks, and you can see that the alley of the spectre trees which usually grows over here is gone. And the wooden blocks, which I collected about 1.5 stacks, are slowly but surely getting cut inside the block cutting machine. And even though this block cutting is rather slow, I want to emphasize that we are not in a rush, and we actually don't need stacks and stacks and stacks of this energy producing spectre coils. We just need a couple. In the meantime, let's take a look at our ender farm. We'll see that we have 8 more ender lilies which can collect and then plant, and our peat bog farm also has a nice production. So as a last step of preparation, we can get ourselves 192 bituminous pit. If you have been following this playthrough for quite a while, you know that I actually set this progress board and the goal to create the spectre coil back in episode 7 more than 6 months ago. And so now I am really happy to proceed. We can craft a stack of conglomerates of coal and then a stack of spectre coils. We can now proudly go into the quest book and collect our common chest as a reward. But in all seriousness, the main advantage of the spectre coil I see is the possibility of just plopping the machine you need, putting some items in, slapping the spectre coil on top, and watch it go with a positive energy surplus. In the future, I'm planning to use the spectre coil not merely as the main source of power, but rather as a backup power or as the method of leveling the load on the system, and otherwise I will try to use diverse and interesting ways of powering my things, just because I would like my playthrough to be fun to make and watch. So how are we going to take advantage of our newly acquired energy source? Well, I'm glad you asked. For the several episodes now, we extensively use XNet, and XNet cannot work without the cables and connectors. Both the cables and connectors in the recipe have these carbon plates, which you can make using compressor from essentially pulverized coal, and you can get pulverized coal if you throw a block of coal into the macerator and you get 9 pulverized coal from that operation. In the case you are wondering where do I get my coal, in between the episodes where I would like to take a break from all of the building, I travel around to such regions like this Chaparral region and harvesting the coal which is exposed on the surface and therefore is easy to find. But now that we have progressed quite a bit and have this awesome energy source, let's switch our gears to another way of carbon plate production, and that is to use metal press. In order to do this, let's go through some of the quests of immersive engineering, starting with improved blast furnace. In order to craft the components for it, mainly the 27 reinforced blast bricks, we actually are going to dismantle our crude blast furnace, which we are using to make steel. We need a hopper, 2 blast furnace preheaters, and 27 reinforced blast bricks to finish the quest. It makes sense to put our reinforced blast furnace next to our iron production, because this is what we are going to transform into steel. And to do this, we just place this 3x3x3 reinforced blast brick structure and place a hopper right in the middle on top of it, and then we click the middle with the engineer's hammer. We can then place the blast furnace preheaters on the either side of the furnace. Next, we can slap a couple output drawers, one for the steel and one for the slag. Connect the top side of the furnace to the XNet, and finally slap a couple spectre coils on the blast furnace preheaters. As you can see at the top of the screen, the spectre coil cannot fully power the blast furnace preheater, because the spectre coil generates 32 RF per tick, while preheater requires 40, but this is not really an issue, because the blast furnace, besides just energy, it also requires blocks of charcoal, which we generate inside the coke ovens, and as you can see, I added one more layer, and this is because we also use the charcoal to press it in the compressor into carbon bricks, and because we don't produce enough charcoal, most of the time compressor stays empty. And the way I set it up is that the input channel for the charcoal on a blast furnace has priority of 10, while the import channel on the compressor has priority of 0. So all the charcoal actually gets into the blast furnace first, and it fills the blast furnace charcoal inventory to the full, and then whatever is left from here is getting transferred into our compressor and gets compressed into the carbon bricks. So slowing down the blast furnace gives us slightly more carbon bricks, and I'm totally fine with that, because honestly, we don't need the steel in the industrial quantities yet. Next, let's craft couple redstone engineering blocks. Easy enough. The next quest is about light engineering block, and as you can see, it requires enriched alloy. And without going too deep into the mechanism quest line yet, couple episodes ago we have installed this metallurgic infuser, which slowly but surely transforms iron into enriched alloy, so we have some. So crafting the light engineering block is not really an issue either. But in order to craft the heavy engineering block, we will have to progress a little bit in the mechanism, because we need to craft the reinforced alloy. And when I say a little bit, I do mean it, because all we need to do is craft the enrichment chamber in order to get some compressed diamonds. And we need compressed diamonds because in order to craft the reinforced alloy, we can use either diamonds or compressed diamonds in the metallurgic infuser. However, compressed diamonds are much more efficient, and because we don't have too many diamonds, we should go that route. Enrichment chamber is relatively cheap, and we should also craft an additional metallurgic infuser. We can then have two separate metallurgic infusers, one for infusing with diamond and one for infusing with redstone, and then right next to them we can put our enrichment chamber. And here I would like to make compressed diamonds, And we are going to use red diamonds instead of regular ones, because obviously you get 4 red diamonds per regular diamond, so this is much more efficient. We can throw in the diamonds in the top container and see them enriched or compressed into compressed diamonds, and you can actually configure the size on this so that the bottom side, you cannot see it well, but it says output in dark blue. Output side is at the bottom, and if you click this button, auto eject will be on, and so you will see your compressed diamonds appear in the container below. In terms of the energy, the metallurgic infusers use 60 RF per tick. Therefore, I have placed 2 spectre coils on them, but the enrichment chamber requires 100 RF per tick, and so I have attached the LV capacitor with 4 spectre coils on it, and it's a little bit wasteful because 4 spectral coils produce 128 RF per tick. However, this is why we automated them, and I believe we can spare a little bit of energy and just waste it. Now we can craft some reinforced alloys. And with that, heavy engineering blocks. Now it's time for us to look into the metal presses. Let's collect all the ingredients. If we come down to the lowest industrial level, you will see where I build the presses. The presses are a multi-structure. They require a couple conveyor belts, couple steel scaffoldings, redstone engineering block, piston, and heavy engineering block. And if you don't know how to build a structure, you can either look it up in the engineer's manual. Alternatively, you can use Schematica mod, open immersive engineering tabs, and here you will have the metal press. But after you build a structure like this, you right-click on a piston with your engineer's hammer, and it will be transformed into the multi-block structure. The way it will work is that the items will get pulled from the labeled crate using this extracting conveyor belt, go through the press, get pressed, then loop around and come into this wooden storage crate. For now, I have built only 4 metal presses, and this will be processing our wires, plates, gears, and finally rods. Later on we will add more presses, but for now just this 4 will do. These metal presses though will not work without a pressing mold, so we will have to go to our engineer's workbench, craft engineer's blueprint for molds, which has pretty easy recipe, and then craft these molds like this. In order to attach the mold to the press, all you need to do is right-click the press with the mold and you are done. Now there is a question of energy. Unfortunately, engineer's manual doesn't really tell us how much energy this metal press is using, so we will have to measure it. As far as I know, and please correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, there is only a single item capable of actually showing how much energy you put in or take out of the battery, and this is basic capacitor bank, which can have a monitor on it. And unfortunately, it requires a basic capacitor, which in turn requires titanium iridium alloy, which we can't craft at this point, so I will resort to this more simplistic method of calculation. As you know, LV capacitors are extremely cheap, so we will use them to make a measurement. Since spectre coil produces 32 RF per tick, I can see what is the minimal amount of the spectre coils needed on these LV capacitors in order to power our metal press and still be in the positive net gain when we convert these couple copper ingots into the wires. And here you go. If we place 11 spectre coils on this LV capacitor line and then throw in 64 copper ingots, you can see that the central capacitor is losing the energy. However, if I put the 12 spectre coils on there, now as you can see we are gaining. I have added 3 more survival generators into the mix, and each survival generator generates 5 RF per tick. And now, if we look at this LV capacitor, you can see that it is pretty much stable. So we can tell that the average requirement of the press will be about 367 RF per tick. Since we have 4 of these presses, we would need quite a few of the spectre coils in order to power it all. So it looks like we will need to find a better power source. Looking back at our mechanism chapter, we will see that one of the next steps is crafting a solar generator, which requires not much, it's just a circuit, osmium dust, and then a solar panel which requires some more osmium. This simple solar panel is very cheap to make, but it only produces about 69 RF per tick, which equals to about 2 of our spectre coils. So we better look into the next quest for the advanced version of the solar generator. Let's craft 3 of these. Advanced solar generator has quite a bit larger footprint compared to the regular one. However, if we take a look inside, it produces much more energy, about 340 RF per tick. We can place 3 of these solar generators under the sky right next to our factory wall and hook it up using low voltage wires, and then on the other side you can see that all our 4 metal presses are neatly connected to this array of low voltage capacitors, which will serve as an energy buffer in case it happens to be night or in case the energy runs out. So today is the day. We are going to grab about 8 stacks of carbon bricks, a stack of steel blocks, and then we are going to put all our carbon bricks into the plate processor press, which makes carbon plates. At the same time, we convert the steel blocks into the steel plates and then compress these into the dense steel plates. The resulting components will allow us mass-produce network cables from XNet and also the connectors. Prior to this moment, I had to spend lots of time behind the scenes in order to craft these components, but now I have this in large quantities, and so we can modernize some of our systems. For example, we can set up this material processing system, which is controlled by the single XNet controller. The cables are hidden in the floor, and I used facades in order to hide them. It has 2 rows of machines. On the left-hand side, we have industrial craft machines, and on the right-hand side, mechanism. In terms of the item input into these machines, you have 2 options. First, you can come to the machine and just directly throw items in it and it will start processing. The second option is to use these iron storage boxes under the machines. And by the way, I just discovered these iron storage boxes from Industrial Craft. They only require iron, and since we have infinite iron at this point, this is very cheap recipe for us, and they look great. So anyway, if you set up a special rule inside your controller for a particular connector for the iron storage box, and you define the type of, for example, ore you want to process, then you can throw the ore into the storage box and it will be directly deposited in the machine. And since there are special items which can be only ever processed in one type of the machine, I have decided to add another option, the third option, and this would be this wooden storage crate for material input. For example, spectre wood actually is only getting cutted in a block cutter, so I have added a rule to my controller which extracts the spectre wood from the wooden storage crate and puts it directly, immediately into the block cutting machine. I don't have to walk all the way to the block cutting, I can just use an input crate. So I have 3 options for the input, but for output I really only need 1 option, and that is all the items outputted will go into this modular storage over here. As you can see, the spectre planks appearing, and so whenever the items get processed, I can grab the results from this modular storage. In terms of the energy generation, on the mechanism side, I have an array of LV capacitors with 2 spectre coils attached to each, and on industrial craft side, I also have a layer of LV capacitors with just a single spectre coils attached to each. Inside my controller on channel 8, the energy is extracted from every one of these LV capacitors, and then it's getting inserted into the mechanism machines. So the mechanism machines are not directly connected to LV capacitors. I get the energy from the XNet network. For the industrial craft machines, I do get the energy from the LV capacitor into the industrial wires, and then it's getting transformed into the EU and inserted into the machine, and the surplus energy is getting extracted from below into the network. So essentially, I have 21 spectre coils acting as a giant energy generator, and then 14 LV capacitors acting as a giant power bank for my system, which is powered through the XNet. And the last thing I'll mention is that the setting up mechanism machines with XNet is slightly more complicated compared to the IC2 machines, and this is because for the mechanism machines, you have to do a side configure. For example, the infuse should be inserted from the top, the item input will be from the east, and the output will be from the bottom. So when you set up the controller for the XNet, you have to actually define the side from which, for example, the input will happen, the side for which infuse will be inserted, and the side for which you will be extracting the items, otherwise the machine will not work. So you will absolutely need an advanced connector under the machine, and just to remind you, the advanced connector does require diamond dust and ender pearl, coil, so this line of machines from mechanism to set up with the NextNet is kind of expensive. But now, thanks to the spectre coils and automated XNet components, I have very efficient automated processing system which is expandable and will save me enormous amount of time. Next thing I would like to improve is our Sandstone generation system. First, in terms of energy, single spectre coil, as you can see, is enough to power the whole thing. However, currently we have to put the sandstone into this ME chest by hand. We can make sand using igneous extruder, and we did this a lot when we were building our ore production building. However, since then, because we updated our pack, the recipe for the clastic deposition augment is changed, and now it is much more complex. Well, let's take a look at the components. The first component, of course, is the quick dry concrete, which we can make if we take a chemical thrower, load it with the liquid concrete and dispense it. So let's first make the chemical thrower. The engineer's manual tells us that we can also craft a large tank and a large focus nozzle. So let's do that as well. And now we can use engineer's workbench in order to place the chemical thrower in, and then the upgrades. So now our thrower is upgraded. Chemical thrower is an interesting device which you can use to dispense liquids. For example, if I grab some water from a pitcher plant, I can then dispense this water. For example, I can water my weeds. But water is not the only liquid you can use. If you open the Enigmatica 2 Expert extended book, you can see a bunch of fluids which can be used with a chemical thrower as ammo, and some of them give strong radiation, some of them are actually pretty damaging, and some of them are flammable. But of course what we want in this case is liquid concrete, which we can make in the fluid solid canning machine from water using grout. The fluid solid canning machine has pretty straightforward recipe, and so I've decided to put it downstairs. As you can see, it requires some water, and the water is provided from this endervoir at the back. It also requires energy, and I generate energy through the use of this single spectre coil up the top. Then it also requires a supply of grout, and this comes from this wooden storage crate. And finally, the product, the liquid concrete, is getting pulled by this fluid tank, and as you remember, you can configure the side. So I have this side pulling the liquid concrete from the canning machine. So now the only thing you need to do is take the empty chemical thrower and right click on the fluid tank, grabbing some liquid concrete, and then once you spray it, you can get yourself the quick dry concrete. One thing to remember though, that if you dispense the liquid concrete and get yourself a quick dry concrete, if you try to harvest it using the regular pickaxe, you will just break the block. So in order to collect it, I will dispense it, and I will use my casting assistant device and use my custom-made Silk Touch spell, which I crafted in the last episode, and then I can easily collect myself 4 quick dry concrete. The next component in our classic deposition augment is of course Oslo glass. And the Oslo glass is associated with harvest level 9 in the main quest we have to do for our getting started chapter. To get there, we can follow through the quest line in the mechanism chapter that starts with Osmium compressor. We can relatively easily craft the Osmium compressor, and then I have specifically prepared a place for it in my mechanism line. We will need a lot of osmium going forward, so I would like to remind everyone how to find it easily. So what you need to do is get down to the bedrock and then find some osmium ore. Then we can craft a scanner module, right click on the osmium ore with the scanner module, and then take the scanner and insert the module into the scanner. So now when we scan our surroundings, you'll see that we see quite a lot of osmium around us, and we can mine to our heart's content. So the next thing on the list is the refined obsidian, and of course refined obsidian is made in the osmium compressor using the osmium itself, but it's made from refined obsidian dust. And if we look at it, refined obsidian dust is actually made in the metallurgic infuser with the use of some diamond and pulverized obsidian, which is of course is made in the enrichment chamber from regular obsidian, and you will get 4 pulverized obsidian per piece of obsidian. However, believe it or not, all we have right now is 63 pieces of obsidian, and this is because I never specifically mined it, I just collected whatever I found on my travels around the world, so I think it's time to automate it. And combining what we learned previously makes generation of obsidian pretty easy. So first we take some cobblestone from cobblestone generator and we throw it into one of these 6 tanks, and this cobblestone is getting sunk into the lava and generates more lava, which is sent to the igneous extruder. And then extruder also needs water, so this is why we have this aqueous accumulator at the bottom. We generate obsidian, and with the current rate of lava production we get about 1 obsidian per minute, which is then sent into this basic drawer. The whole thing is powered by a couple spectre coils. One powers the controller and the second one powers the extruder as well. So pretty simple setup, doesn't produce too much obsidian, but at the same time we don't need too much, so for now this will just do. So let's pulverize 16 obsidian and then infuse it all with diamond. While this is happening, let's work on the glowstone ingots, and for that we'll need to throw a stack of glowstone dust into the osmium compressor. Once glowstone ingots are ready, let's make refined obsidian ingots now. Everything is ready to proceed with Oslo glass creation, because currently we have 64 ingots for each of the components. So let's melt 32 ingots of each, and this gets us 32 ingot worth of molten Oslo glass. Oslo glass solidifies extremely slowly, so let's speed things up with time in a bottle. And from our output chest we will collect 2 large plates, 1 ingot, and 1 sharpening kit. The ingot allows us to finish the mechanism chapter, and the sharpening kit allows us to finish harvest level 9. As a reward, I'm going to pick 8 steel leaves, and this is because I would like to make an axe out of them. Specifically, I would like to add a living wood tool rod so that it repairs itself, well-established copper tough binding so we get experience when mining wood, and finally star metal large plate so it bears unnatural trait and mines blocks below the obsidian mining level faster. One of the reasons to use this axe would be just to mine the spectre wood trees faster, but the second reason is because of the axing 2 trait on the head of this axe, we actually get 6 planks per piece of wood, so we get a pretty good multiplication and we can get more wood out of these trees as well. Also, just for fun, because we do have Oslo glass sharpening kit, let's update our axe to the Oslo glass mining level and come back to our classic deposition augment crafting, where as you can see we are missing 3 components, and these are nickel gear, redstone conductance coil, and irithium dust. And back in episode 11, where this recipe was quite simpler, I actually crafted all 3 components, but if you go back and take a look, for redstone conductance coil I actually use this recipe, which requires electrum ingot. However, there is an easier one that requires a flux wire coil, which is quite easy to craft because now we have aluminum wires and we can grow pure flux crystals. So I crafted myself this flux wire coil. We can go back here to our atomic reconstructor, throw it, press a button, and now we have our redstone conductance coil. So finally we can get what we need. Back at our astral sorcery shrine, we can have a setup like this, where the aqueous accumulator collects water, which is getting pushed into the igneous extruder, powered by a single spectre coil behind the wall there. The lava, which is not getting used and just has to be there, is combined with water to produce sand. Now we have the augment, and then the sand is pushed down into the analog crafter, which combines the sand into the sandstone and sends through this import bus into our ME chest. In the case you are wondering how I managed to hide the cables, I'm using facades from Applied Energistics 2, and we can remove them, for example, here. And if we'll take a look at the recipe of this facade I crafted, you'll see that it can be practically any block in Minecraft, surrounded by these cable anchors, and the recipe for that is just any sort of metal plus this cutting knife, which has a straightforward recipe. But what's interesting is that if you type the word facade in the GAI, you will not be able to find all these facades. Moreover, if you take a look at the uses of the cable anchors, the recipe for the facade is again nowhere to be seen. The reason for it and the recipe is not showing in a JI is because, like I said, almost any Minecraft block can be used in a facade. So there are thousands upon thousands probably recipes for these blocks, and in order to save on the pack loading times, I believe these recipes are hidden, and therefore in order to craft the facades you kinda have to know the recipe to craft them and about their existence in advance. But now, with the addition of the sand automation, our system for the endstone production is running automatically and doesn't require any sort of input. Now that we have large amounts of spectre coils in our possession, there are many things I would like to do. Of course, I would like to update our sifting building now that the recipes for sifting automation have changed. And also, our progress board is currently empty. And so I am very keen on setting a brand new ambitious long-term goal for us, which would require us building new setups, study and progress through the magic, and work through multiple quest lines of this awesome pack. Those of you who are with me on this series for a long while can probably guess what this goal will be, and I encourage you to actually try to guess in the comments and see if you got that right. But for now, I would like to thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Same place.